Good morning, everyone. I am Vanessa Gadiano, and here I am to discuss Thomas Aquinas' natural law together with the Greek heritage. So, first, let's have our lesson objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to first, recognize how Thomas Aquinas made use of ancient Greek concepts to provide irrational grounding to an ethical theory based on the Christian faith. Next, identify the natural law in distinction from, but also in relation to, the other types of law mentioned by Aquinas: eternal law, human law, and divine law. And the third, apply the precepts of natural law to contemporary moral concepts. So, what comes on your mind when you hear this? The light of reason is placed by nature and thus by God in every man to guide him in his acts. So wherefore, if man were intended to live alone as many animals do, he would require no other guide to his end. Each man would be a king in himself under God, the highest king, inasmuch as he would be a king unto himself under God, the highest king, inasmuch as he would direct himself in his acts by the light of reason, given him from on high. So yet it is natural for man more than for any animals to be social, political, and to live in a group. So therefore, in short, human beings alone among God's creatures use reason to lead their lives, and this is the natural law. So now, let's move to Saint Thomas Aquinas, which was called the angelic doctor. Why angelic doctor? He's called the angelic doctor because of his angelic purity, his writings on the angels, and his angelic wisdom and angelic piety. The oldest Catholic school here in the Philippines, which is the University of Santo Tomas, was named after Saint Thomas Aquinas. So, he is also known as Aquinas, Dr. Angelicus San Tommaso de Aquino. He was born in the year 1225 in Rocaseca near Aquino Terra de Lavoro, Kingdom of Sicily, Italy, and died on March 7, 1274 in Fossa Nova near Terracina, Latium, Papal States. He canonized on July 18, 1323, or he officially declared to be sent on July 18, 1323, and he is an Italian Dominican theologian, the foremost medieval scholastic. He is a priest, he is a Catholic priest, a friar, and his notable works were De Regime Principum, Summa Contra Gentiles, and Summa Theologiae. So, the context of the Christian story. So, we are created by God in order to ultimately return to Him. So, that marked the phrase after St. Thomas Aquinas. So, his book, the Summa Theologiae, it is the magnum opus of St. Thomas' body of work and still regarded as one of the most precise, detailed collections of Christian theology. Theology means the study of nature of God and religious belief. Summa Theologiae follows the trajectory of the story. So there are three parts of his voluminous works, and in the first part is Aquinas speaks of God, and although we acknowledge that our limited human intellect cannot fully grasp Him, we nevertheless are able to say something concerning His goodness, His might, and His creative power. We never question about God, His power, His creative power, His goodness, His might, His strength, because God created us. And this part recognizing that we are created by God. So first part, only speaks or only talks about God. And the second part deals with the man or the dynamic of human life. This is characterized by our pursuit of happiness, which should realize rests ultimately not only on any particular good thing, but in highest good, which is God Himself. So this part mainly talks about the man, the human life, the humanity overall, the pursuit of happiness, which accord to the goodness of God. So the third part, our striving for this ultimate happiness, while important, will not it itself bring us to this blessed state. So in other words, salvation is only possible through the presence of God's grace, and that grace has become perfectly incarnate in the person of Christ. So thus, the third part focuses on Jesus as our Savior. Given that our concern here is the question of ethics, it would seem clear that what would be of greatest interest to us is the second part on human is the second part or the section of this story that centers on human life and its striving towards God. However, bringing up towards the notion of living a good life leads us to God could easily be misunderstood as a simple exhortation to obey certain rules as a given to us through the church doctrines or by the following certain passages lifted randomly from sacred scriptures. So in other words, we may fall into the danger of divine command theory which we would have explored in the first chapter. Instead, we should hope to find that there is much greater complexity but also coherence to the ethics of Aquinas. So now let's move to the context of Aquinas' ethics. So a full consideration of Aquinas' ethics would require us to explore his discussion of other matters such as how in our pursuit of happiness we direct our actions towards specific ends. We might explore how passions or how emotions are involved and therefore require a proper order if they are properly contribute to a good life. We might explore how our actions require or how our actions are related to certain dispositions in a dynamic way since our actions both arise from our habits at the same time reinforce them. So we might explore in his discussion of how we develop either good or bad habits with a good disposition leading us toward making moral choices. So thereby contributing to our moral virtues and a bad disposition leading us toward immoral choices. Actions related to certain dispositions in a dynamic way develop good or bad habits with a good disposition leading us toward making moral choices, thereby contributing to our moral virtues. So the picture here are the moral virtues or the good habits. Next, bad disposition inclining us toward making immoral choices, bringing us to vice. So these are the immoral choices that man might choose. So the Christian life therefore is about developing the capacities given to us by God into a disposition of virtue inclined toward the good. So Aquinas also puts forward that there is within us a conscience that direct our moral thinking. So this does not refer to some simple intuition or gut feeling. For Aquinas, there is a sense of right and wrong in us that we are obliged to obey. However, he also added that The sense of right and wrong might be informed, guided, and ultimately grounded in an objective basis of morality. So we are called to heed the voice of conscience and enjoy to develop and maintain a of life of virtue. However, this both require content. So we need something more. We need a basis for our conscience to be properly informed, and we need a clearer good point on whether certain discussion or certain decision uh, make lead us toward a virtue or vice. So being told that one should hate one's conscience, that one should be virtuous, thus very little to guide people at that what specifically should be done in a given situation. Thus, there is a need or a clearer basis of ethics, a ground that will more concretely direct our sense of what is right and wrong. For Aquinas, this would be the natural law. So as you can see here, conscience is at the center of this Venn diagram. Empathy, moral reasoning, self-conscious emotions are just a support for one's conscience. So we can recall how the ethical approach called the divine command theory urges a person towards unthinking obedience to religious precepts. Given the problems of his simplistic approach to ethics, we can contrast how the moral theory of Aquinas require the judicial use of reason. In doing so, one's sense of right and wrong would be grounded on something stable, human nature itself. We will start by exploring how Aquinas restates the Christian message, making use of a philosophical vocabulary approached from in ancient Greeks. We then look at how Aquinas speaks of the essence and also the varieties of laws. From there, we will able to explore the precepts of the natural law. So let's move to the Greek heritage. So in Neoplatonic good, God creates. This does not mean that He brings about beings, but it also means that He cares for and thus governs the activity of the universe and of every creature. So this central belief of Christian faith, while inspired by divine revelation, has been shaped and divined by an idea stated in work of ancient Greek philosopher Plato, which had been put forward 1,000 years before Aquinas. He is credited for giving the subsequent history of philosophy in one of its most compelling and enduring ideas, the notion of a supreme and absolutely transcendent good. In his work, The Republic, is often supposed that Plato is trying to envision the society, but that plan is only a part of a more fundamental concern that animates the text, which is to provide an objective and standard for the striving to be moral. In other words, it can be said that Plato was trying to answer the question, why should I bother trying to be good, and why cannot good be just whatever I say it is? A good which is prior to all being and is even the cause of all being will become a source of fascination and inspiration to late thinkers even to this day. The next centuries after Plato's time, some scholars turned to his texts to decipher the wealth of ideas contained there. So because they saw their task as basically clarifying and elaborating on what the great thinker had already written, These late scholars are often labeled as Neoplatonists. So, in the hands of the Neoplatonists, Plato's idea of the good, which is the source of all beings, become identified with the one and the beautiful. This is ultimately the reality, which is the oneness that will give rise to the multiplicity of everything else in the cosmos. All these beings have a single goal, which is to return to that unity. So, a good which is prior to all being is even the cause of all being will become a source of fascination and inspiration to late thinkers even to this day. The source of all beings become identified with one and beautiful. So all these beings have a single goal, which is to return to that unity. And this, the good and the one, exert from the Enneads from Plotinus. So through Neoplatonists like Plotinus, the Platonic idea of the good would continue well into the Christian Middle Ages, inspiring later thinkers and allowing it to be taught anew in more personal ways as a creative and loving God. In Aristotle's exploration of how to discuss beings, he proposes four concepts which provide a way of understanding any particular being under consideration. Any being, according to Aristotle, can be said to have four causes. So there are four causes of being. First is the material cause. Any being that we can see around is corporeal, possessed of a certain materiality or physical stuff. So first, we recognize that any being we can see around, the materials or the physical stuffs, we can refer to this a material cause. For example, a wood, that is a material cause. Formal cause, structure or design of being. So a being is individuated. It becomes the unique individual being that is because it is made up of this particular stuff. Yet, we also realize that this material takes on a particular shape. So, for example, a bird is different from a cat, which is different from a man. The shape that makes a being a particular kind can be called its form, thus being also a formal cause. Efficient cause is something that brings about the presence of another being. So one can also realize that a being does not simply pop up from nothing but comes from another being which is prior to it. So parents beget a child. A mango tree used to be a seed that itself came from an older tree. A chair is built as the product of a carpenter. Thus, there is something which brings about the presence of another being, and that is efficient cause. Next is the final cause, the ultimate purpose of being. So, since a being has an apparent end or goal, a chair to be sat on, a pen for writing, a seed to become a tree, a child to become an adult. So one can speak of that is the final cause. So here is the example of the four causes of being uh, according to Aristotle. So this is wood. The wood is the material cause. Then formal cause is the design. So, I would like to make this wood a table. So, that is a formal cause. Kailangan mo ng, you need to think for a shape or for a form of that wood. So, I would like to make it a table. Then, efficient cause is carpentry. This is something that brings another presence for another being. So, you can make this wood through carpentry. So you can make this wood a table through carpentry, and that the final cause is the purpose of that table, purpose of that wood that you made it to form a table to uh, and to make it a dining table. So that are the four causes of being. So it is not the case of being that is something which is already permanently set as it is as the remains forever. So forever unchanging. So in addition to describing a being, Aristotle also has to explain to us the process of becoming or the possibility of change that takes place in a being. So a new pair of principles is introduced by him, which we can refer to as potency and act. A being may carry within itself certain potentials, but this requires being actualized. A puppy is not yet a full-grown dog. This protection or these potencies are latent in the puppy and are actualized as a puppy grows up and achieves what is supposed to be. The process of becoming or change or be explained in this way. Understanding beings, how they are and how they become or what they could be is the significant Aristotelian contribution to the picture which will be given to us by Aquinas. So, that could be all for Thomas Aquinas and the Greek heritage. Hope you enjoy my video and stay safe and goodbye.